Do artists get better as they get older, or are they over the hill? In this video I'll discuss 10 artists who still painted into their 80s. Among them are the greats like Titian, Goya, Hokusai and Monet. And I'm curious to hear from you in the comments whether you agree with this list. And before we start, let me say that I have focused on artists who lived at least a century ago. So you don't find the likes of Marc Chagall, Georgia O'Keeffe, Henri Matisse, Edvard Munch and Pablo Picasso on this list. But there are many other great artists. Born around 1430, Giovanni was the youngest of the two famous Bellini brothers from Venice. He was among the first Venetian artists using oil paint, and his use of beautiful colors revolutionized Venetian painting. Saint Dominic is his last portrait he painted at 85 years of age, and his naked young woman in front of a mirror, painted the same year, shows some similarities to the innovative style of the up-and-coming artist Giorgione. Some evidence that even at his old age Bellini still was open to learn and innovate. But he was getting older and his productivity and precision decreased somewhat. The Feast of the Gods was among his last works, but it contains additions from Dosso Dossi and a young Titian, someone who still had a career of 6 decades in front of him and who I will discuss in a little bit. In this list of people who still painted at their old age, Michelangelo is a bit of an outlier. Not because he lived until age 88 and the fact that he was still active, but because Michelangelo was occupied by other activities late in his life. At age 71 he was appointed as the architect of St. Peter's Cathedral. Here you can see his drawing for the Dome of St. Peter's. However, all his architectural work later in his life left him little time to paint. It did not mean that he didn't have time to do any other artistic works though. By the time of his death he was, for example, still working on the Rondanini Pietà. Titian is undoubtedly the most successful Venetian artist in history. And while there has been quite some debate about his exact year of birth, the consensus is that he lived and worked until his late 80s. Titian regularly adapted his style throughout his career, but one thing remained, and that was his interest in color. Later in his life he started to use less precise but freer brushstrokes, as he believed that would result in more lively paintings. Here are some examples of works that he made while he was already in his 80s, and except perhaps for the quality of the pictures here, these works are still of very high quality. And this Pietà he painted in the last year of his life was intended to hang above his own tomb. Sofonisba Anguissola was born around 1532, and she is one of the few women from that time who had a long and prosperous career. Unfortunately, not too many paintings by her have survived, perhaps because she was a woman, but she was an artist at heart for her whole life. Here is a self-portrait of her at age 78. After a prosperous career in Italy and the Spanish court, she would live until age 93 in Palermo, where she would receive many artists, including the Belgian master Anthony van Dyck, who painted this portrait of her at age 92. Her eyes were not working as well anymore, but she still was mentally sharp. Unlike many other people on this list, the Dutch Baroque artist Frans Hals was not famous anymore by the end of his life. In fact, he lived in relative poverty, so he had to continue to work. At age 81 he received 2 large commissions for regents' group portraits from the regents and regentesses of the Old Man's Almshouse in Haarlem, where he lived all his life. He actually was still improving on his compositional skills for these group portraits compared to his earlier work, but he was not as strong anymore in his hands, which is why he used relatively light touches, giving a bit of an impressionist feel to both works. Francisco de Goya was born in 1746 and by age 40 he was the court painter of King Charles III and he was in high demand among the Spanish royalty and aristocracy. But before age 50 he became deaf and he suffered from mental problems. It would change the themes of his art, which became much darker. But he also continued to be an artist. When he was 78, he would leave Spain and move to Bordeaux, France, and despite suffering from all sorts of health problems, he continued to paint these portraits and etchings until a stroke and his failing eyesight no longer allowed him to continue. The Japanese artist Hokusai was born in 1760 and lived for almost 89 years. He reportedly started painting at age 6 and during his career he created over 30,000 paintings, sketches and woodblock prints. The most popular one is arguably the Great Wave of Kanagawa, part of a series of 46 works featuring Mount Fuji. He created these works when he was already 71 years old, but he was far from done, as he was on a lifelong search for perfection. Tiger in the Snow was painted when he was 88 years old. On his deathbed he said, "If only heaven will just give me another 10 years. Just another 5 more years, then I could become a real painter." Jean-Auguste-Dominique Ingres was born in 1780 when Rococo art was in vogue and lived until age 86 when the Impressionists were already making their first innovative works. And Ingres was also still actively painting in his 80s. He had remarried at age 71 with a woman some 3 decades younger and this really reinvigorated him. Here you can see a self-portrait of Ingres painted when he was 84 years old, though he made himself look a bit younger than that. And although he did not paint many originals in his 80s, he did adjust or copy some of his earlier works, including the ones shown here. If you can still create this magnificent painting in your 80s, you must be a true master. Ivan Aivazovsky was born in 1817 and he painted thousands of seascapes during his life and he never really slowed down. Here you can see him at age 76 in front of one of his works painted in 1893, a year after he made an extensive trip to the United States from Crimea near the Black Sea. When he died in 1900, the following was written on his tombstone: "He was born immortal, left an immortal legacy," referring to his numerous stunning works. The famous Impressionist artist Claude Monet was born in 1840, and after some difficult decades to convince people of the beauty of Impressionist art, he became very successful from the 1880s onwards. In fact, as he got older, he became somewhat of a living legend, living in a large house in Giverny outside Paris with an enormous garden that he designed himself. When he was already in his 60s, the water lilies in his own large pond became his obsession and he continued to paint them into his late 70s. But he started to get problems with his eyesight, and you can see from these works of his rose garden that his works became more and more abstract in his 80s. But whenever his eyes were not completely failing him, he continued to paint until his last days. Well, I hope you enjoyed this overview of artists who are still active in their 80s. As you could see, some of them may have produced some of their best works at old age, while others already suffered from various physical problems. That's also the reason that some old artists have not made this list. Painters like Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun, Edgar Degas and Marie Cassatt, for example, did not paint anymore in their last decade. I'm curious to hear which artists you think are missing from this list. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, and I hope to welcome you in another video soon. Thanks for watching.